Hey, I'm Pascal from Orangepixel, and today it's not a devlog. I've been watching my last couple of videos, or at least the videos I've been making just globally, and it's all been devlogs for the past couple of months, which is fine, but I want to do more creative, interesting stuff on the channel. I also started this channel with the idea to mainly show other players or gamers, but also some other developers, how games are being made and everything that goes into it, and all the struggle and all the decisions and all those type of things. And that also includes business decisions. And lately I haven't really talked about business decisions. I do my yearly review at the end of every year, and you can watch those back on the channel. Every year I talk about how it went as Orangepixel. This is my full-time job as a game developer. So for me, running Orangepixel is business. I see it as a business, and not so much as that romantic notion of being an independent game developer that everybody is raving about. Of course, that's what I am. But for me, the main thing, it's a business. Now, on last week's video, I mentioned that we now have finally gotten a name for the new project, and that I am thinking about doing a Kickstarter. I did a Kickstarter for Residual, the game I'm about to release next week, but we'll talk about that next week. Residual coming on September 9th. Check the description for all the info. Anyway, I did a Kickstarter for that game, which went well, and I talked about doing another Kickstarter, and somebody commented on last week's video with an interesting question. Let me show you on screen somewhere. That question. Kickstarter, early access. I think those are very different things, two very different things. So after the intro, I'm gonna explain a little bit about my thought process on that, because that's business. We'll get into that after the intro. Alright, so the difference between Kickstarter and early access. For me, Kickstarter is pretty much what you use to fund development of the game and to figure out how much you can create, and we'll get to that in a minute. Early access is pretty much at the end. You already have a game. It might not be complete or final. You still want to tweak stuff based on player feedback. You might want to add more and more content to it, but it's fully playable and everybody can buy the game, enjoy the game, play it fully. It's just not final. You're still adding stuff and updates and content and things like that. But pretty much most of the work should be done by the time you enter early access. So for Kickstarter, it's different. This is pretty much trying to find investors in your idea. Right now, the game Regulator City, I'm working on it. It's not done, but it shows potential. It shows the direction I'm moving it towards, and I think I can almost type out the document that says the things that I will be adding and the goal I have with the whole game design. But it's far from done. It still needs a lot of months of work. But the thing is, how many months can I still spend on the game? I need some funding for that, and that's where Kickstarter comes in. Alright, so the most obvious example I can give on this is Regulator City, the game I'm working on right now. Check my other videos in the last weeks. I'm gonna do a Kickstarter probably with this game. Not sure yet, but I think I am. Right now, my decision on when I start the Kickstarter is based on my income for this year. I always have a certain goal, and this is what I tell in every yearly review. My goal is like 50,000 in a year. That's the revenue I want to be making as Orangepixel. How close am I to that goal? How far am I away from that goal? If I run a Kickstarter, should I run it this year to reach that goal, or is it perhaps better to run it next year and not have it being part of this year's revenue? The decision on that is pretty much based on tax laws and tax rules. So I could be making, like, let's say I make 200,000 in a year. That's a great amount of money for the Netherlands, in Europe. But that also means that I pay almost 100,000 in taxes. I mean taxes, not taxes in the United States, but taxes, T-A, that one. That's a lot of money, and that's just a waste. Of course, I still have 100,000 left from that revenue, but if I make only 100 a year, I pay not 50, but maybe like 30 or 40,000 taxes, and if I make less, I pay even less. There is a certain levels and tires and based on that they calculate how much tax you have to pay, income tax. So I just try to be at a comfortable level that we can live very comfortably, and I don't have to stress out too much every year. And that's just one of the things that goes into deciding when do I start a Kickstarter. The next big question is, of course, how much are we gonna try to get with the Kickstarter? What's our goal? What's our funding goal? And what does that give us? So the thing with doing the Kickstarter, how I did it with Residual last year, Residual was 4 months in development, I think, and then I wanted to see and decide if I could do a Kickstarter that would pretty much overlap the rest of the year, so would bring me somewhere in November, December, and then I would launch the game in perhaps early access or just launch it completely and do updates after that, because that's pretty much the same thing in my opinion. So I set the goal for that Kickstarter at $10,000, I think, which was 8,000 euros. That covers pretty much 2, maybe 3 months of money, pretty much. So that's not a lot, but that would have allowed me to keep working on the game, release at the end of the year, and then hope for a very good release and sell more copies, or move on to the next project depending on how that would have went. Of course, that all changed when Apogee stepped in as a publisher, and the game, it's about to release next week, and it's gotten a lot bigger then, and will release on consoles besides PC, and a lot has changed on that one. But that same goal is what I'm gonna try and do again, or have to calculate and do a decision on for the next Kickstarter. How much money do I need? What does that bring me? How many months of development can I then put into the new game before I have to release it? Those are interesting decisions that usually people don't think about, but for me this is a business, as mentioned before, so every week, every day, every month that I put in game development, I need to make money from it at some point, either at that same point or same month, which is almost impossible, or as soon as the game releases, and then in the years after that it needs to make sure that all the money I've put into it at some point somehow makes it back to me. So for me, so far it has worked out very well with almost all my games, an exception here and there. But there's a long tail for games and revenue, and that's another thing you have to keep in mind when you do decisions like this. So the long tail for games is pretty long in some cases. For example, my oldest games in circulation right now and still being sold, I think, are Gunslugs and Heroes of Loot. They were developed and released back in 2011, 2012, somewhere along those years. So that's a decade-old game, or decades-old games. They're both still selling. Of course, last year I started working together with Serious Lion on the Discord, Friedel, and we started porting my older games, including those, to the Switch. We plan to release them on Xbox and PlayStation in the near future, but we've been caught up with a lot of other tasks and stuff, so we didn't get that far just yet. But I still plan to release them on those platforms. Alongside those couple of games, there's of course Space Grunts 1 and 2, and all in all I think about a dozen games, or a little bit under a dozen games, that are still generating revenue, being released on new platforms, making more money and new money, and that's 10 years of some of those games have been releasing and making money for 10 years. That's not a huge amount of money. I think for the Switch version right now, we did fairly well. I think we did a decent number for the current games that we have released. We are still promoting them and selling them on discount and things like that, and that keeps these games alive. I'm also selling them on iOS and Android and PC versions, still doing discounts and sales, and every now and then we find new players that enjoy these games and then buy the other games and come into the Orangepixel universe. So all that stuff makes money and is part of my revenue in a yearly basis, and all those things have to be juggled and calculated and estimated on how much money is coming in from those games, and over time it's going to be less and less, so there need to be new games and bigger games that make more money for the next decade, and that's a lot of business and a lot of decisions that you normally might not think about, but that's pretty much constantly on my mind. That's part of running a business, I guess. In any other industry, wherever you're doing, you're constantly trying to balance everything that's coming in and going out, and trying to just grow and make it work. And that's a lot of stuff that I usually don't talk about on the channel, or I just don't really talk about because it's kind of boring or sometimes maybe not interesting for everybody, but it's constantly a thing that you should be thinking about if you want to be a full-time game developer or do this as a job and as a business. Forget the romantic idea of being an independent game developer doing your own thing. There's a lot of other factors that just come into it and into play, and it's running a business. Like any other business, there's tough decisions. There's sometimes you have to do things you don't want to do, but they bring in money, so it's probably smarter if you do those things, because that allows you to do the other stuff that you do love to do. And that's all a balancing act that goes on and on every day, every week, every month. It's a lot of fun though. So where does that leave me for this year? Well, it's been a bit, sorry, just moving you a little bit. It's been a bit of a weird year with Residual having a publisher. That's a first for me as well. That changes a lot of all these decisions I had to make revenue wise, and what's coming in, what's going out, and slightly harder to calculate these things. But as for the Kickstarter for Regulated City, I was first thinking to do it later this year. But I think my calculations, and even if I'm very far off, then I still think this year is pretty much going well, going great, almost great. So the Kickstarter is gonna be next year. That allows me to do a lot more work on the game in the coming months. So the game will be much further or closer to something of a completed game or playable game. And perhaps I might not need the Kickstarter at all at that point. We'll have to see. But yeah, for now the Kickstarter, the decision for that is still up in the air. I might do a Kickstarter. I am working towards that goal, but if I do it, it will be somewhere early next year. We'll hope for the best. Early access, to get back to that little comment on YouTube. Early access is still an option after you do a Kickstarter, but those two things are just simply very separated things. One is for funding your idea, the other is for buying your idea, even though it's not fully done yet. Hope that makes it a little bit clear, or at least how I think about it. But I also think early access should be a game that's playable, fully, completely playable, and not just a demo, but really it should be a complete game that you could release if you want to, but you prefer to get feedback from players and maybe tinker with it some more and push updates. Another thing that you should consider when doing early access, you only get one release window. Early access, most game sites, if you're even getting close to getting some press attention, most will ignore early access games. If you then release that game a few months later or a year later or whatever, they can see it as old news. They might also not pick it up because, well, it was in early access, so why should we pay attention now? Unless a lot of people have been playing it and your game got a lot of exposure already. In that case, you don't even need the press, but that step is very hard to do. So it kind of depends on your kind of game, your target audience, if you should do an early access or not, I think. I usually prefer just to release the game and push updates to it, which is pretty much the same thing. Almost any game that's released these days is in early access because we all keep pushing content and updates to it until it stops selling. Then we need to move on to a new project that hopefully does sell again. So a lot of decisions to be made, and I hope this video was interesting, and if it was, don't forget to subscribe. There's a bunch of other content on the channel that you might be interested in, and leave a comment below, because that helps the algorithm and helps these videos get seen by other people or something. I don't know, just, you know, those things. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye.